Ayes have it. The clerk will read the order of the day.
President. To Mr. Deputy President.
Dr. John Kaye.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move, according to contingent notice, that standing and sessional orders be suspended to allow a motion to be moved forthwith that private members' business item number 346, outside the order of precedence relating to the Save Gosford Public School Bill, be called on forthwith. Mr. President, just briefly, this legislation will prohibit the transfer of the students from Gosford Public School to Henry Kendall High School, and it will require the Minister to consult with the community before any moves to shut down Gosford Public School go ahead. This matter is urgent because the Department of Education and Communities has already commenced planning for the move with the aim of transferring the students by 2014. Parents and teachers have repeatedly tried to meet with the Education Minister but have been unable to do so. They've had no success. Mr. President, members of the community met with the architects yesterday, and the DA for the first phase of the project will be before Council next week. This matter is urgent.
Are there any further contributions? Being no further contributions, I'll put the motion. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those to the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Dr. Kaye.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the government and opposition giving urgency to this matter. Mr. President, Mr. Deputy President, I move that private members' business item number 346, outside the order of precedence, be called on forthwith.
I'll put the question. Those in favour of that say aye. Those to the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move. Mr. President.
Yeah, just.
I move, according to notice, that leave be given to bring in a bill for an act to prevent the relocation of Gosford Public School to the grounds of Henry Kendall High School, and to ensure that the parents, staff and community are consulted before any alternative site is chosen for Gosford Public School and for other purposes.
That's a question.
No, it's on the second.
Yeah, sorry. There's no further contributions. I would put the question. Those in favour of the question say aye. Those to the contrary say no. Were there any ayes?
Yes.
There was. I can't think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, it was ventriloquist.
Mr. Deputy President.
Yes, Dr. Kaye.
Mr. President, I move the bill. I present the bill, and move that this bill now be read. I'll do that again. I present the bill and move that this bill now be read for a first time and printed.
The question is that the bill be now read a first time. Those in favour say aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Save Gosford Public School Bill 2011, first reading.
Dr. Kaye.
Mr. President, I now move that this bill be moved a second time. Mr. President, this legislation responds to the urgent cries for help from the Gosford community, in particular from the parents and teachers at Henry Kendall High School and Gosford Public School, and from the teachers represented by the New South Wales Teachers Federation and by the Federation itself. It seeks to stop the dash for cash sale of Gosford Public School and the transfer of students into incredibly cramped conditions at Henry Kendall High School, conditions which will interfere not only with the education of those children who are currently at Gosford Public School, but also with those children at Henry Kendall High School, and particularly those children, those secondary students with special needs. Mr. President, the Save Gosford Public School Bill 2011 would achieve these aims by 1. Prohibiting the relocation of Gosford Public School to the grounds of Henry Kendall High School, 2. Ensuring that teachers, parents and the general community must be notified and consulted before a decision is made on any alternative site for Gosford Public School, including a meeting with the Minister. 3. Requiring the Minister to personally attend a meeting with the local community to discuss alternative sites and to consider their submissions before making any decision. And 4. Permitting Gosford Public School to continue to operate its current site until an alternative site is found consistent with the other clauses of the proposed Act. Mr President, there are many reasons for being very concerned about the plan developed by the previous government and enacted by this government to force a relocation of Gosford Public School to Henry Kendall High School. Principally among those for the Greens are that the special needs unit at the high school will have to be moved to make way for the new primary school buildings. Rather than the promised state-of-the-art buildings with the latest equipment, the unit will now be situated in refurbished technology rooms in a building which is on the state's asbestos register, with a less than satisfactory outcome, particularly for those students with mobility issues. Mr President, secondly, two separate schools deserve two distinct sites. Gosford Public School and Henry Kendall High School are separate schools, and it would be inappropriate and unacceptable to locate a primary school and a high school onto one site. Further, the projected student enrolment will be 1,300 students learning in cramped and noisy classrooms. The playground area, crucial to the development of students, will be inadequate in size and in location. The total size of the land of the two schools would be 4.65 hectares. The New South Wales Government's own asset management site procedure for New South Wales schools of February 2008 says at section 3A, quote, primary school sites should be around 3 hectares in size, while 6 hectares is desirable for a secondary school. Mr President, if the two schools were to be put on one site, by the New South Wales Government's own policy, that site should be 9 hectares. The site proposed is just over 55% of the requirements. It's a measure of how cramped the new site will be that the relocation will have in A block of the Henry Kendall High School students from both from Gosford Public School and from Henry Kendall High School sharing one building, with the primary students on the top level and directly below those are classrooms for the secondary science labs. The movement of students, the subsequent noise will impact on educational outcomes for both sets of students. Most importantly, Mr Deputy President, co-location will forever block any potential expansion of the schools. The local member, Mr Chris Holstein, stated some time ago that Gosford will attract about 10,000 new residents into the area because of the redevelopment going on. That will put additional burden on the public education system, and yet the combined Gosford Public School, Henry Kendall High School site would not be able to cope. It will be too cramped to allow for that growth to occur. Mr President, this proposed merger has created massive response from the community, from parents, from teachers and from community members. Since the announcement in June 2010, there have been protests, public meetings and a petition which received in excess of 10,000 signatures and a letter writing campaign. Every request to meet with the Minister so far has been rejected. Mr President, a survey conducted by the previous government found that 77% of parents were completely opposed to the relocation of Gosford Public School to Henry Kendall High School. Instead of an open consultation process to look at alternative sites for Gosford Public School if it had to be moved, the previous government and this government conducted a behind closed door review of the alternative locations, which was cut short without any warning and they were carried out with no consultation. Nobody really knows what other possibilities were looked at, despite a large range of alternatives being put forward by the community. Mr President, this bill is important for the community of Gosford. Passing this bill through this chamber would be a message to that community that this parliament cares about the educational future. It cares about what's going to happen to public education on the Central Coast, and it cares about those parents who are having children now and who want to have the security of knowing that high-quality primary and secondary education within the public system will be available to them as their children grow up. But it's much more than just about Gosford. This bill is about the future of public education across the state. Because, Mr President, if this bill goes ahead, what it is effectively doing, this bill fails to go ahead and the government pushes ahead with their forced co-location of the two schools, then a nasty and dangerous precedent has been set. In 2010, the Boston Consulting Group presented a report to the previous government that suggested there was $850 million of potential savings from forced school closures and forced mergers. Mr President, given that all governments are now driven by Treasury and Services and Finance, and given that the primary objective of government is not the delivery of high-quality services but the balancing of budget, public schools like Gosford, high schools like Henry Kendall and hundreds like them around the state will become an attractive target to a government which is fixated on the budget bottom line and not on the needs of the community. Mr President, if this bill does not go ahead and if Gosford Public School is shoehorned into Henry Kendall High School, then every school around the state needs to know that they too are on the chopping block. They too may become a grab for cash in a land sale that is not in the community's interests and not in the interests of public education. Mr President, this co-location is driven purely by budgetary reasons. It is not driven by any sense of quality education and creating a future for those children. This Parliament has an obligation to the community in Gosford and to communities like it around New South Wales to stand up and be counted, to pass this bill and to force this government to undo not only its own errors but the errors of its predecessor and begin a genuine, open consultation with the folk in Gosford. Mr President, before I complete, I do want to acknowledge that this bill comes to this Parliament after a textbook campaign in order to secure a future for the children of Gosford. I want to particularly acknowledge the Parents and Citizens Associations of both Gosford Public School and Henry Kendall High School. And in particular, I want to point out the extraordinary work of Jackie Draper and Helen Vocalan, two parents at Gosford Public School who have put their lives on hold in order to battle not just for their own children, but for the children of Gosford, for the children of New South Wales, for the children of Australia. This state, this country, is well served by parents who go out there in the PNC movement and battle for their public schools. It should not be thus. No government should put the future of any public school on the line in this way, but it is thus. And because there are parents like Jackie and like Helen and like hundreds of others who have attended meetings, who have baked lamingtons, who have gone out and collected those 10,000 petitions, this bill comes into Parliament today with an urgent plea to all of us to support this. I also want to thank the work of the New South Wales Teachers Federation, and particularly their Central Coast organiser, who have worked tirelessly to protect the children and the public education outcomes for the Central Coast. Mr President, this bill is a matter of important conscience for all of us to stand up and vote for this bill and to say to the government, put a hold on it, talk to the community, develop an outcome which might not be as financially advantageous to the government in the short term, but will serve the economic, social and justice outcomes for the future of New South Wales. Mr President, I commend the bill to the House.
Deputy President, I move the debate on this bill be adjourned for 5 days.
The question is, as the member put, those in favour say aye. Those to the contrary say no. The ayes, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Clerk will read